There you are.
Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now in our 22nd year, I interview writers about their craft, what they've done in the past, what they're working on now, what they might have planned for the future. We also have other kinds of artists and creative people on. We have sometimes musicians, we have sometimes scholars, we've had actors. We cast a pretty wide net. So if you have ideas for people who might be good guests for the Writer's Block, please watch for our address at the end of the show. I'd also like to remind you that a play called The Yates Game, which started life here in Gloucester, later went to Boston University, is going to be opening in New York in February. Watch for theyatesgame.org, that URL website address, also at the end of the show. I'm very happy to say tonight that we have a special guest. Her name is Mary McCarl, and she was recently honored in the spring of 2011, given a special award by the Historical Association here in Gloucester for her work as an historian and an archivist. I want to get that name correctly. The Gloucester Preservation Awards was the ceremony, and she was given a special award back in May of 2011 for her archival and historical work. Mary was born in Philadelphia, but as a very young girl moved to Boston where she was raised, and from which she visited Gloucester all her life as a summer visitor and has for many years now been a full-time resident of Gloucester. Her background prepared her perfectly for being an archivist and historian. She studied medieval history at Harvard and took a degree in history as a medieval specialist. She later got her master's degree from Simmons in library science, so she combines both the material and matter of history with a genius for organizing it and being able to retrieve it. Mary McCarl, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Well, thank you very much, John. I think this is fun.
I'm very glad you could be on because I made a note during the Preservation Awards to see if I could get in touch with you because I think that was quite an honor and a deserved honor that you got for the work you do here in Gloucester.
Well, thank you. I do enjoy Gloucester. I always consider Gloucester, although I expected for a long time I was always going to be a perpetual summer person. In fact, I've been here full-time now for 10 years. My husband, who was a college economics professor, retired in 2001, Henry McCarl, and John Bell immediately put him on the planning board. And I went on, got very involved with the archives in the basement of City Hall, and also with the library in the basement, we're always in basements, of what was then the Cape Ann Historical Association, is now the Cape Ann Museum.
Now, your history interest goes back at least to your undergraduate days. Was it inspired even before that? What made you, as a girl, before college even, be interested in history as a study?
Well, I think I benefited greatly from going to a girls' school, and in the 50s, I graduated in 1957, at the Windsor School, we had what was called a 3-year history sequence. We wanted to do it. And it integrated art history with mostly, in those days, political history. The art side was taught by a wonderful lady who said, now, if your mothers take you to the museum, to the Louvre or the British Museum or whatever it is, you have to be able to tell them what's there. And we worked with a whole lot of reproductions of famous paintings and sculpture. And also on the history side, a wonderful teacher, Nancy Rolker, who went on to teach at BU for many years. So I think my interest started when I was about 12 or 13. I always liked history.
Your high school instructor put this almost archivist responsibility on you immediately.
Exactly, yeah.
And that stayed alive for college.
It did, yeah. I've always been interested, I think, in one of the reasons I like medieval art is the integration of the writing side and the illustration side.
So I should mention you specialized in European medieval history.
That's right, and a lot of art history along with. It could have been one way or the other. But I think my favorite manuscripts were always, I wasn't so interested in depth and perspective and things like that. I liked the message, which is why the Bayeux tapestry is such fun. Everybody's always pointing, and then it's all in the top, it says, was it Iste Mirant Stella? Here they are looking at the star, and there's everybody with their fingers up looking at the star. And I loved that play of the words and the text.
You mentioned before the show that for your medieval concentration, you had to have a pretty good handle on several languages. What sort of languages were demanded for you?
I'd had French since the age of 5, but then we went into Old French and Middle French. I did classical Latin in school, but then I had to do medieval Latin and a couple of dates of Italian. I had a terrible time with German. I was much happier with the Romance languages. And I really wanted to do a PhD on the Norman Kingdom of Sicily in the 12th century, but it would have meant Latin, Greek, and Arabic. And although I might have handled the Greek, there was absolutely no way I was going to start to do classical Arabic with no preparation. So I stuck to the mainland where I didn't need the Arabic. But it would have been fun.
So the past was always enthralling for you, specifically the Middle Ages. What made you turn towards library science?
Well, I started on a PhD, frankly didn't like it. Harvard they used the graduate students as coolie labor. And we were meant to be productive scholars, but we were also meant to grind along as what they called section hands.
Has that changed much?
I doubt it. This was, 40 years ago. And I didn't like it. And also, coming along in the mid to late 60s as a graduate student, the interest in history just totally disappeared, particularly with 1968. And the old became irrelevant. So I backed off, and my daughter was born in 68. And I waited till she was about 3, and then I went to Simmons and got a degree in library science. And as I was telling you, John, briefly, the University of Massachusetts in Boston had a very interesting degree, another master's, in history and archival methods. The impetus behind it, a lot of it was out of MIT, which was trying to make sure they documented the work of all the scientists from World War II. This was almost 40 years after World War II, and they were retiring. And they wanted to make sure they had all their papers and all their oral histories in place. There was great feeling that they needed to get the whole scientific revolution studied. And even though you can't second guess what will be of interest to later scholars, if you are pretty broad about it, you'll probably pick up stuff.
Well, they had Los Alamos and all.
Oh yes,
all
yes.
To
Doc Edgerton's lab during the war made the triggers for the bombs and put all that together with lasers, and all that has been documented. But I think because of my background in medieval history, I ended up working for the Congregational Library in Boston, which was religious, New England religious stuff, and the Genealogical Society on Newbury Street, where they happily put me in the manuscript division because I could read all the scripts without any trouble. People stumble all that old church stuff. I had an article published I did it with somebody else. There was an edition of more or less almost a private diary of one of the early clergymen in Cambridge. And he'd only been trained in Latin, so all his abbreviations were the Latin ones. But I knew what they were from my studies of handwriting.
Now, your background in history and library work, although library work has changed radically in the last 15 years, but those two backgrounds seem to suit perfectly the work and your intentions here, working with Gloucester's history and Gloucester's archives, which embody the records of that history. Can you tell us something about how you got involved in Gloucester archival work and what that is?
Well, I'm not sure when I wandered down to the basement of City Hall, but it was early on. As I said, or at least I think I said, I married Henry McCarl in 1987 at St. John's Church on Middle Street. And he was on sabbatical that year. I wanted to know what we had for the history. The archives had really been founded, and for many, many years, a wonderful contribution of the Rays, Alan and Mary Ray. They had done extraordinary work in trying to preserve the documents. For a long time, they didn't have any office down there. They just worked in the corridors. If you've ever been in the basement of City Hall, which is not one of the more attractive parts of town, I must say, Gloucester made a whole lot of money out of the fish in the Civil War, because
during the Civil War.
During the Civil War, because it was cheap, it kept, and the Union bought huge amounts of fish. And they were very prosperous when they came out of the war. So they decided to build themselves a town hall that was up to their modern standards, a brick town hall. The town hall of the time was what's now the Legion, the wooden Legion building at the foot of Washington Street. But they decided to build a brick one. They built it in 1867, finished it, dedicated it, and it burned down 18 months later. They dug out the basement and discovered that the vaults in which the oldest records had actually survived. So that the oldest records, and Gloucester is, we think, has the oldest running records in the country. I can't be absolutely sure of that.
The oldest running records in the country. And they've survived the fire of, I think, 73?
67. 69. 69.
Fire was in 69.
Yep.
Just almost immediately after the building was finished.
Almost immediately. It was extraordinary, but
I always thought that was suspicious.
Yeah. Well.
But it's a little late. The statute of limitations is over with.
Well.
So in the vaults survived our city's records from
1642.
17th century.
1642.
The earliest records of 1640s.
They opened the Town Book 1 was 1642.
And you think, or historians here think, these are the oldest consecutive city records kept in the country?
That's our feeling. We can't be absolutely sure of it, but
there's certainly stiff competition up and down the East Coast
for
that title.
Yes, sure. Well, Gloucester was fortunate. As I said, the first brick building was Town Hall. They built on the foundations. They built the new one, and then almost immediately, that was dedicated in 1871, almost immediately they started to agitate to become a city. And the first city clerk was John J. Babson. No, am I right? No, excuse me, I may be wrong there. I'll have to check that.
The historian?
Yeah, he was not. No, that is incorrect. Oh dear, I'm sorry about that. But the first city clerk was very interested in preserving the records. and he went to considerable length. Some of them were copied by hand, but he wanted to bring in records from the quite simple departments. But nonetheless, we've got them.
So the idea that history doesn't exist or continue to exist by itself, it has to be cared for.
Oh,
it has to be kept up. A struggle that.
It's a terrible ongoing struggle.
Tell us about that ongoing work that you're doing now with the archives.
Well, the Rays have retired, and Sarah Dunlap and Janie Walsh are now the heads of the archives volunteers. They get no money from the city. The space is provided, but the space, quite frankly, is awful, the office space.
You're referring to the basement.
I'm referring to the basement.
I know, for our viewers, I know if you walk into the Dale Street entrance that is below and to the left of the stairways going up to the main building, the main floor of the building, and you go in there and then go left, and then there's a door on the left again, and it's a little, almost like the size of a kitchen, really.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very small, very cramped. But I've been there, and the workers, yourself and others, are so busy. It's much like a hive.
Oh, it certainly is, John.
See everybody working.
It was condemned for practical purposes. One federal office was told to move out because it wasn't healthy. So that's how the archives got it. We put together, with our own money, donations and a bequest, we hired an architect and have some really quite nice plans to renovate down there in the basement. Everything's on hold now. I am on the City Hall Restoration Commission, but we're sort of waiting to see what happens. The state archives, the state government, the state archives, would prefer that we not be in that building. They don't really like the archives to be in basements.
For the safety sake of
For the safety
archives,
sake of the records, But we are mandated by law to be close to the city clerk, and we're just almost under the city clerk. So it really has not been totally.
So the state is worried about the preservation of the material documents?
That is correct.
Not a health concern for the workers. It's the paper that
they tend to pay more attention to the paper. There are certain standards that we all know about, but I don't know a place that's really met all the standards.
What you as a volunteer or others, Sarah, for instance, when you go to work down there, what are you dealing with, or what are you doing with the archives?
Well, Sarah and Janie, I don't volunteer that much there anymore. I'm more concerned with the Cape Ann Museum. They are working, preserving the. Now, I must say there's a distinction between archival records, which are permanent records, and those by law must be kept. And they include births, marriages, deaths, city council records, certain decision records, legal records. But then there are others that have a throw out by date. You are not mandated to keep everything, in other words. And those are not archival. And a great many of those are, I would say the majority of them are wherever the department is to which they apply, or which generates them. And a good many of them are over in the basement in the post office. The boxes all labeled for throw out April 1, 2012 or something like that.
So those are going to be destroyed.
Those will be destroyed.
On the material that has to be kept, that's been kept since the 1840s, is that all organized, or is that organization still going on?
It is. It is ongoing, but it's in excellent order. The volunteers have been working since 1987, and they've got the old materials in excellent order, in good boxes, some of them in magnificent volumes, all carefully preserved with mylar.
They're not vaulted though.
Well, that's the trouble. Those vaults can only be described as brick closets. They're not up to any sort of standard, modern standard. As I said, the storage kept the things in good order in the fire in 1869. But since then, they gaily cut holes in the brick vaults and strung water pipes and electric cable and everything else. So the integrity of these of the vaults is shot.
So there's danger from water, there's danger from fire, there's danger from normal weather,
Yes,
humidity
yeah,
rising,
sure,
falling,
yeah.
that sort of thing.
We in 2004, because a lot of my work was with the Genealogical Society in Boston, and I was involved in the professional groups, the New England Archivists and various other groups. That included the Northeast Document Conservation Center in Andover. And they, with federal money, it was a National Endowment for the Humanities, got money together. You put in a grant proposal, and a visiting archivist came down and evaluated your collections and the storage. And we have that report. By the time she got there, City Hall, the roof was in bad shape, and they'd evacuated City Hall. So I brought her in one incredibly cold February day with a hard hat on, and we climbed around and looked at what there was. It's a rather scathing report that says
City Hall,
yes,
continue.
Yes, without a doubt.
I just got the 5-minute signal from our director, Andrew Love. I wanted to get in a couple late questions. Can you think of one or two examples of documents in our Gloucester archives that are especially interesting or remarkable for historical reasons?
Well, I like...
Just one or two.
Sure. I must say I'm very fond of the walking vote. And the walking vote was from probably June 1776. The town clerk was Samuel Whittemore. He had very nice handwriting, thank goodness. They assembled. There were not very many voters because there was a property arrangement in those days. 125 men. If they were in favor of independence, they walked in one direction. If they were not in favor of independence, they walked in the other direction.
What date was this?
This was June of 76.
1776.
1776.
We're talking about American independence.
American independence.
So all the voters were gathered.
All the voters were gathered in the meeting house down on Grand Circle, in what was there. And they had the walking vote. Everybody walked to the yes side. Nobody walked to the left. And then the next thing in the town book is very carefully written out, the whole Declaration of Independence.
So this is one of the most ancient copies of the Declaration of Independence.
Well, in a sense, yes. Yes.
I just got the 3-minute signal from Andrew.
Okay, but that's fun.
What can Gloucester viewers, or anybody from Cape Ann, who would like to help with the archives do? Where could they go? An address or a name?
Well, the archives, let's see, that's City Hall. Is that Ninedale Avenue? Yes, I think so. Mm-hmm. Ninedale Avenue. The city archives. We do have a bank account, and we donations gratefully
so people are welcome
received.
So they can go down to the archival room.
Oh, definitely.
And talk to
Sarah, Sarah and Janie. They're there Monday through Friday mornings, from 9 to 12, 9 to noon, in the basement.
And our viewers can see for themselves that the archives need a little more space.
Definitely need more space. We definitely need better storage of things.
Mary McCarl, I want to thank you very much for being on the Writer's Block.
Well,
and sharing some of your historical perspective with us.
well, thank you, John. And someday I'll talk to you about the Cape Ann Museum's manuscripts and things
good,
too,
good. We'll
because
have you
they're
back.
fascinating.
I want to thank our TV audience as well as Mary McCarl for being with us this evening. If you've learned something about Gloucester's history and how it's preserved and maybe not preserved, then the Writer's Block has done its job tonight. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block.